The session is called Eats, Shoots and Leaves, and why we believe, and I believe, that the future of online community management means that context of the conversation is king. Quick show of hands, how many people are from a community management or operations team at a game developer in the audience today? And from a service supplier, tech company? And the rest of you are just from general industry companies. Lovely, thank you for that. It's not necessarily my role here to scaremonger or to use fear as a way to drive change, but we are all aware of the dark side of the internet. Any quick search surfaces a sea of articles and upsetting news stories, and the nature of the activity seems to be changing almost daily. And the reality is that online communities are continually being infiltrated by trolls, abusive content, and spam. Community managers will often actually say that it's less than 1% of their community that create the issues and can make more than 90% of the headlines you see here. But what's happening now seems to be growing. The challenge feels like it's getting bigger and more widespread, and the variety and the nature of the trolling and abuse is constantly morphing in terms of type and sophistication. Right now, these behaviors are becoming more and more visible. Many of us are finding that the sheer scale, complexity, and ever-changing nature of the challenge to identify the perpetrators and find the needles in the haystack, or actually, as we're seeing, they're becoming the needles in the needle stack, is becoming increasingly difficult and time-consuming to manage. And we need to be able to do something about it. We have a moral responsibility, in my opinion, to the most important people, the players of our game, who trust we will keep them safe and secure. But let's also not forget, it's about our brands, our reputations, and our future business success. And it's unfair that so few people can cause so much damage to the games that you have lovingly created and the experiences that your players have cultivated. However, management of many game development studios and companies tend to have this reaction when faced with a challenge as to how best deal with their toxic communities. All these reactions and more are ones that I've heard on many occasions. And whilst I'm almost certain that in most cases moderation is taking place, whether through human or technology intervention, just because you're not always seeing reports of toxicity or that they're not being reported, are we sure that this is the reality? Are we sure that there's not more under the lid that we need to uncover? As this quite famous Donald Rumsfeld quote said, it's the unknown unknowns that are ones that we really need to focus on. And we should all be aware that what we don't know, and trying our utmost to ensure we are fully aware of what's really going on is absolutely imperative. Recent research that was conducted by Telefonica, the Qatar Research Institute, and the University of Washington analyzed a data set of over 10 million player reports on 1.46 million toxic players within League of Legends. This showed that players very often don't report toxicity, even though it's definitely happening. In their research, only 1 to 2 reports were filed for each 4 to 9 players exposed to toxicity. In other words, at one end of the scale, 50%, 2 to 4 reports, is the best case scenario of what was reported. And at the worst end, 12%, 1 in 9. In other words, 88% reports of toxicity could get unreported. What we do know is that the implications of toxicity are far-reaching. Cyberbullying is associated with depression, anxiety, and has been shown to result in self-harm in several well-publicized cases. With the amount of time and energy players invest into games, victims of toxic behavior are likely to feel emotional effects that persist into the real world. I therefore think that we all have a duty to look under the bonnet of our online communities to see what's really going on. It's clear that moderation of some kind is an absolute must. But my strong belief is, right now, neither humans nor computers alone are sufficient to root out and to deal with these systemic problems. And with the fraudsters themselves now using sophisticated AI to defraud and spam us, we need to be on the front foot, meeting them with fire and playing our most sophisticated hand right back at them. Human moderation is, of course, an essential piece of the puzzle in the pie. However, it will never be able to cope with the large volumes of chat, is time-consuming, not to mention costly, can be upsetting for those involved, and unless you have true 24/7 coverage, your community is left vulnerable after hours. The technology-led moderation tools that are available are developing at speed, but many remain fairly imprecise and blunt, mainly involving keyword-related searches. They don't reflect the dynamic shifts and the changes of hate speech, for example, or have the world knowledge essential to understanding it. Trolls and bots have also become very savvy at getting past the current filters, deliberately misspelling words or phrases, so keyword algorithms can be easily tricked and flummoxed. Remember, the competition here is sometimes a 12-year-old adolescent with a huge imagination and who has just learned Unicode. But what's more, current technology rarely looks at the entire conversation, at the history of it, or at the context of a chat, taking into account people's emotions and reactions. So what could the future look like in trying to deal with these tricky issues? My belief is that we need highly sophisticated combination of natural language processing, conversation modeling, and data reporting working together to deal with it. We need technology that doesn't just look at individual situations and flag right now instances of problems. We need to be able to consider past user patterns when we encounter a new cause for concern. We need to be able to store that data and then also use that data to look at future potential conversations. And we need to look at the whole story with context and history and need solutions that can look at people's reactions to work out what is really going on and what actually is a problem and needs to be flagged and what isn't. So the important thing here is that we need technology that watches and learns, fully understands the entire story, what are the norms of the community of the game, and the entire context, and then only highlights situations that definitely need action. So I'm going to look at 3 examples. First, let's take swearing and bad language. In a kid's game, it's okay. It's not okay and needs dealing with. Many adult communities have lots of swearing, and that is okay, as long as it's within the community norms, and the people who are swearing at each other are very fine and comfortable with it. You don't want that being flagged. We don't always need to raise alerts around the swearing itself, and if you ban in-game words, then you also risk disturbing the regular chat and the balance of the game. And you would, in the end, just annoy regular players who really, whilst actually not really preventing much toxicity. Plus, game type also changes the violence of the language, so the community norms and platform policies must be taken into account. Here's an example of chat within an online game. There are multiple players that can all hear and see the same chat and are all talking at the same time. A human moderator may watch this chat, but it may be too complex or happening too fast to notice some of the nuance. Taking a lens to it, we can see that one player has complained about someone swearing. We can now look back in time at which other players were involved and what they were saying. But there are multiple overlapping conversations going on here, and it takes some intelligence to disentangle these conversations from each other to understand what is really going on. With AI models designed and built to spot patterns in our conversation data, we can spot the specific interaction that was the case for this complaint. We can now look at the story behind this complaint and potentially judge the severity of it. Note that the interaction between players continues after the complaint. So this is adding further context to the story that we store and use again and again in future. If our swearing player apologized and did not swear again, then that individual's story has resolved itself without the need for action. So with swearing, we need to be able to dig deeper, to take a look at chat history, see who is involved, and see who is causing the offense. Only when we have that 360-degree context can we work out the right way to deal with the issue. And the only way to get that insight is to move beyond keyword moderation to more sophisticated moderation tools. Second story is to take a look at how contextually aware AI could reveal serial harassment and make a real difference to diversity and inclusion online. Female harassment is a real issue. It's putting millions of women off playing games that have chat functionality. Earlier this year, an article appeared in the Huffington Post, written by a woman who, while playing a two-player game, was immediately targeted by an endless stream of inappropriate advances. She shared her story on Instagram and found that loads of her friends were having exactly the same issue. She just wanted to play the game, and the effect on the game developer was huge. She didn't want to find a boyfriend, didn't want to have strange men chatting to her, and didn't want to be virtually harassed. And game developers need to act here. It's not only to stop the women feeling violated, but also to stop them turning off thousands and hundreds of their friends. 50% of the potential audience is being lost. We saw this in practice with our own client, who had no idea they had this problem until an implementation of new technology uncovered it. So this was a two-player gaming environment. Men were lurking, waiting for women to join the game and enter into the chat. Before they even played the game, they would greet new female players with a variety of inappropriate advances, with just something that could appear relatively innocent, hi sexy, hi beautiful. And the women just exited the game immediately, not interested in being approached and no longer interested in playing the game. In this example, actually no response actually is a response. The visual here shows the impact of one man in the very center. And the dots show people who, after having an interaction with him, then left the game immediately. There were 720 occurrences of this one person causing customers to leave the game, probably forever. This one player cost the game company $250,000 per quarter until he was discovered. The game company concerned couldn't see what was happening, and without digging deeper, they would never have known that a few people, we discovered about 30 in total, who were behaving in exactly the same similar format and were causing such a huge loss of female players. In turn, having an impact on their reputation and some bad press. But the interesting thing here is how these men were able to be tracked and caught. It wasn't through a keyword-led moderation tool or by human moderators, because no single interaction between the aggressor and any one person would have raised any red flags. Discovering this story required natural language processing, that found particular types of speech combined with reporting methods that exposed repeated patterns of behavior. And with this tech combination, we could see that this man was harassing women all over the place. Also note that this player was reported 1 in 40 offences. The customer service team saw that the rather benign message and ignored the report. And seriously, it's a mild phrase, high beautiful, high sexy. But in aggregate, it caused a lot of financial damage and sent women away from the game. In another example, this was a sample size of 12 million messages that were being analysed. Because we could actually aggregate to player IDs, we could then identify and help the community management team focus on the players that were potentially causing the most harm, but also, on a positive way, the players that were most engaged. A chat moderation tool that just flags individual words would never be able to give you this insight into your community. So with this powerful technology, we could see that the various women who left demonstrated with various different behaviors not to be happy with their advances. In fact, it was in some cases, it was their lack of a response that raised the red flag as opposed to an actual reply. Interestingly enough, it also had a big impact on game design. After revealing this, the studio changed their game flow such that you could only enter into the in-game chat after playing the game rather than before. Third example, final example, was an organised attempt to get Happy Hanukkah classified as hate speech last year by a certain group of white supremacist anti-Semitic groups. The tactic was cleverly based around the attempt to overload comments in response to any Jewish postings wishing their friends and family Happy Hanukkah for no reason at all and at any time of the year, whilst the phrase is only normally used during the month of December. The strategy was based on the fact that if there would be enough negative responses to the words Happy Hanukkah throughout the year, then the phrase would slowly but surely become flagged by keyword moderation tools and would be playing directly into their hands. Keyword moderation alone would not be able to tackle and solve the issue, and the only way to combat this is with AI that recognizes the entire context of the chat, seeing the intent and the story behind the words. In all these examples that I've showed, the key was being able to look at the situations and the stories in context. Without context, in all cases, this toxic activity would have flown completely under the radar. So what do we need from community moderation, the tools, in order to meet this challenge head-on up front? The classifiers we build need to be able to distinguish the similar wordings, but also with the intent behind them. We need to look at patterns across multiple messages and also an entire user's history. Training those models based on the standards within the community, ultimately to empower the people that matter the most, the community moderators that are protecting our players. It's not just about well-being, harmony, and world peace, although indeed it is now the case that the games industry is being used as a testing bed for bots, as games are seen as a relatively easy platform to perfect their logic and algorithms before taking their nasty behavior onto Twitter and Facebook to cause further harm and destruction. It's about the business reality, it's about the bottom line, and it's about your KPIs and player engagement. And then the impact of doing nothing, and the impact of doing nothing without a contextual approach is much, much greater than you think. So when we act, we need to look beyond human moderation, and in my world, online community moderation, the context is king. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, so I got one, which is about the hate speech.
Yes.
That was shocking, that example there.
I can take you back.
Mild. That's different to, if you've got a player who is being abusive in a game, you can retrospectively ban them. You can, stop their chats, things like that. That has a real impact to that player, presumably, if they're engaged with the game. With this kind of stuff, you're looking at people who are sock puppeting and have hundreds of accounts. And the danger is you give publicity to them effectively by trying to act against them. So how do you keep up with that compared to, say, the gaming stuff, which I can see that might arguably be a bit easier to moderate?
Well, obviously, this was an example outside of the games.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was quite relevant in terms of where things can go within a social community. And obviously, you can find this kind of hate speech within online game communities as well. And there's no reason why a white supremacist group wouldn't target a game community as well as just normal social media groups. I think there's two things to observe there. One is, what I wanted to show here is that it would be you need an AI approach to look at the context to uncover what was really going on. If you just looked at the facts and the actual text that would be used in a conversation between these two people, nothing would be flagged. Yeah. It's just the use of the word Happy Hanukkah, which is a positive word in and by itself. So only by looking at the context, the history, and also the time of year. Yeah. That was the other relevant thing here. You wouldn't necessarily normally use those phrases in April. Right. And I think that because if you can run these tools 24/7, you build up a pattern and you store the knowledge. And that is the other difference with the chat moderation tools. They just take place, the action takes place in a millisecond if a word gets flagged. By storing up, you inform your classifiers much better to learn and see what's happening in future, to be preventative rather than reactive. So that goes to hopefully answering your question about you're not giving more news because you'll prevent it from happening in the first place. It's a different approach.
Thank you very much. I have sort of a specific question. How would you go in implementing this sort of changing this moderation system and communicating it to the community to avoid misunderstandings? Because there are always hiccups when you start implementing this kind of system. Well, any new system, any moderation system. But at the same time, avoiding bad actors starting to anticipate your changes and find workarounds, because they always find some.
It's about working with the team and understanding the nature of the moderation and how it works within the game. I mean, the problem is you'll work with game developers that are doing very, very little. And you're working with some game developers that are doing a lot, but they've got a huge team of moderators, and you need to find a way of obviously utilizing the technology to empower them to make their own decisions. And I think that's what it is about the tools. The tools don't necessarily solve the problem. What they do is they provide the data and then empowers the community management teams to then come up with a strategy and plan as to how they're going to implement it. Do they blatantly inform and openly inform their community that there is now special tooling and different rules that we're going to apply? I would have thought it's in the community manager's interest to be as open as they can with their community about what they're doing. And if the bad actors are being caught, well then, good luck to them, because they should be. I don't think we should be scared about taking them on head on. And the fact that if they are going to find more and different sophisticated ways to get around the tooling, the fact that also at player ID level, yes, of course, you get the traditional thing of 100 different accounts being created, but you're only going to be able to pick up more information and data by running this kind of technology 24/7. Otherwise, you're going to be armed with nothing, and that's going to not help you take on the challenge.
Simon, thanks very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, everybody.